Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. Thanks for tuning in. This is going to be the pre-free agency episode, and we're going to sort of discuss the different options, just a couple of different options that the Lakers should probably target now that we know just kind of who's available, who's opted out of their player options or team options, and then now we also kind of know what's going on with the Russ opt out and all that sort of stuff. So what I wanted to do today was actually just as a refresher, um, talk about a few avenues that the Lakers have that they can go. Some are more limiting than others, but there's still avenues that I think that they should consider, just because you want to see if you can utilize all the mechanisms that you have to potentially build the best roster you can under Ham's scheme and philosophy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and we're just going to go over it together. So if you've been following me at all on the timeline, I've already mentioned that there's been a ton of players that have already just sort of presented themselves, surprise candidates of players that were either they got their options declined, or they never got a qualifying offer from a team, and these are good quality players. And so I have a short list of players that we should probably consider. Some are wings, some are not wings, but we can discuss them. I'm not going to get too deep into it. These are just people I would recommend that we target, that fall into that high IQ shooter, or like a 3 and D wing and a little bit more, and just kind of just players that we need, 82 game players that we need on this roster. So let me share my screen so that we can dive into this. Okay, so the thing I wanted you guys to see is that right now the Lakers are in an interesting situation. So right now we have a bunch of guys, and I'm just going to start renouncing these guys because let's just assume we're not going to keep them, and Spotrac has them on here. So what we're going to do is I just want to give you guys like a live look of what it looks like. Let me move this out the way so you guys can actually see what it is. So you guys can see what I'm trying to show you. So I'm going to renounce all these players so that we don't have to worry about unnecessary players. Let's just assume that everybody that was on this Lakers team last season is no longer going to be on this team, other than the guys that already have contracts and that are already here. And there's essentially two situations that the Lakers are in that they can potentially tackle or potentially utilize. Now, with Russ opting in at $47 million, we are very limited in the ways that we can get players. It's got to be either by trade, which is trading Russ or trading Talon or trading Kendrick Nunn, or it has to be using the taxpayer mid-level exception. So right here down at the bottom, you see it says non-taxpayer. So we have the taxpayer, which is smaller. It's like six million, maybe closer to $7 million, is what it is. So that's all we have. We don't have the biannual exception, because the biannual exception, if you use it's less. It's like $4 million, and you can only use the biannual or the taxpayer exception. So as soon as you use one, you can't use the other. And the other thing is also, if you use the biannual exception, instead of the taxpayer exception, you get hard capped. And so we would have a hard limit. But there is something that's going on. There is something that sort of is an avenue that I think that we should consider. And I'll present that. So as of right now, these are the players that we have on our roster. Wendy Gabriel is the only one who's non-guaranteed. Austin Reeves has a non-guaranteed contract, but we're not going to cut him. Stanley's option was picked up. Everybody else opted in to their player options. So if we go as it is, if we operate as it is right now, the Lakers they're actually in the tax, right, by about $750,000. So because they're in the tax, they have the taxpayer mid-level exception. So that's what you're hearing a lot of writers tell you, that if the Lakers want to use their full MLE, which is like that $6 million, $7 million number, they can use that to target like the most important player that they want to target in free agency. So We've heard names like Mo Bamba, who could potentially be a guy. And mind you, we could always split these up. We could split the 7 million up into 3.5 each, and then offer it to guys who are only getting veteran minimum offers and want something a little bit more competitive. We could do that too, but I would guess that the Lakers are probably going to try and offer the entire thing for a really prized candidate if that's who appears. Like a guy like Bamba, who I think would be an excellent fit. I didn't think he would even be available on the market, but a guy who spaces the floor, is routinely used as a screener, like a pick and pop option and stuff like that. He's a very good target, and if Ham wants to use him in sort of that Brook Lopez role, getting him at that number would probably be one of the best values in the league. If just because you could see how the fit would work for his style of play, natural fit next to Anthony Davis. If we play 4 out 1 in, Anthony Davis will be the 1 in, and Bamba could be the guy that's above that can be above the 3-point line, and that's actually good, because we would rather have a guy who can shoot from above the 3, because then that person can be the screener, as opposed to burying him in the corner, which is less helpful, because when you put a big guy in a corner, teams will still take their chances with having a guy in the paint and then recovering out to the corner, or having rotation set where they rotate to the corner. So having Bamba available, another guy I've mentioned, Jalen Smith, over in Indiana, who had his option declined and was traded. He's another guy who's a good above the wing 3-point shooter. If you can land one of those guys, the geometry of your court gets a little bit better. Your shooting threats become a little bit better. And if the shooting threat is also an active screener, like a really good screener, and a willing screener, that's even better, because now it's 2 birds with 1 stone. It's a natural fit into your pick and roll offense or something like that. And that's why Ham is going to run. He's going to run more pick and roll. If Russ is on this roster when the season starts, or even if he isn't, if it's somebody else, like that's going to be something that we run a lot. And so that's just something that I think we should be aware of, or just something to consider. So as of right now, that's all we have. We do have Marc Gasol's trade exception. You can see it down here. Sorry, let me scroll down for you guys. They do have, I guess you guys can't see it because, let me do this. Okay, so we still have Marc Gasol's trade exception. Small amount. You don't think it's anything you would think that that's not really valuable, but a team like OKC that has Kendrick Williams at $2 million, and he's an unguaranteed, they're going to have to eventually guarantee his contract. They've got 16 players on the roster. They have to waive some guys. They're going to sign, they may extend Lou Dort, and because he's an RFA now and stuff like that. So if they're trying to just, instead of just waiving him, trading him somewhere, the Lakers can offer a really late, like a fake second rounder that's not really a second rounder, and offer to absorb him and let, and send one of those second rounders that would never actually convert to OKC. And that wouldn't be a bad thing. Kendrick Williams is about 6'7", 220, I think. He's a decent sized wing. Sort of OKC plays the 4-out offense to some degree, and so he'd be an interesting candidate just to use a trade there. But there's not too many guys that are at that number. It's just OKC has these really small salaries where that sort of thing happens. Another guy that's potentially available, I think. Over in Sacramento, Trey Lyles, I think he's only getting paid $2.5 million. He would fit nicely into the Lakers trade exception too, if they wanted to try to target somebody like him. And so it's just interesting. It's interesting that options that they can consider. So we don't have that many options. After we sign the guy at the MLE, then it's just veteran minimum guys. And there's guys that are out there that may not be worth more than a veteran minimum that the Lakers can target. And a lot of the names that you've seen float out there are they're good players. And remember, we can still trade Talon, we can still trade Nunn if we want to, and add more wings or address specific needs that we have on the team, but we're limited. So the other option I wanted to present, which is limiting in some fashion and would require the Lakers to be extremely smart and savvy, which I'm not quite sure our front office is very good at. So I don't know if they would do it, but it's something that I would consider if we want to be more competitive in the free agent marketplace, right? Is if the Lakers waive Wenyen Gabriel, and I'm going to do it so that you guys can see what happens, right? And this is nothing against Wenyan. This is just, it is what it is. He's on guaranteed contract. If the Lakers waive Wenyan Gabriel, right, like this, what ends up happening is that they actually end up under the tax line, which means that if they're under the tax line, what's going to end up happening is they'll go from having the taxpayer mid-level exception to now having the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, as well as the biannual exception, right? So now you have a $10 million cap exception that you can use. So now you have more spending power. Now you could target two guys, and you can say, I'll give you $5 million and I'll give you $5 million. And now you're taking them out of that veteran minimum space, or you're outbidding them, compared to the rest of the field. Or you could offer a full $10 million to one guy, maybe if there's somebody who's really, really good that you want to target, that you think is worth that much money. Could be a guy like Bamba if a non-taxpayer team targets somebody like him. But then you also get the biannual exception, which is something you wouldn't get in the other manner. And because you get both of those things, that gives you $14 million of spending power that you can use in free agency. The catch, though, is that you're hard capped. If you go over a certain amount of money in the non-taxpayer, the Lakers would do that. Like, it wouldn't make sense to go and access these two things and then not do it. Like, you're going to get hard capped. So the Lakers would have to be willing to get hard capped and then move underneath the hard cap in order for them to be successful. Now, the hard cap number that we're looking at, so the tax threshold is 150 million here. The hard cap apron that you can't cross is about 157 million. So that means that even if we like as of right now, we couldn't offer that non-taxpayer MLE or the or what am I thinking of, the BAE without getting hard capped. Like you wouldn't be in a competitive space. However, if the Lakers are planning, or and this is something that I don't know, but if the Lakers have a lead on a trade for Taylor, or a lead on a trade for Kendrick Nunn, or they have a lead on a trade for Russ, that's going to end up dropping them further below the cap. Okay, so like they're not taking on more money, like they're sending out Russ's 47 into OKC's cap space, and they open up a bunch of they're opening up more cap room for themselves to absorb salaries, use a traded player, etc. Whatever it is, if they're expecting to do something that lowers their cap hit, then you can do it. So, for example, I'll give you an example of this. If they have a deal in place for Taylor Horton-Tucker to go to another team that really wants him, that has the cap space, or they have a smaller salary that they want to send back, and they can absorb Taylor because they need him, they need his body or whatever. They have another guy that's not available that they don't want to use. Like, the Lakers can lower their cap hit that way. Same thing with Kendrick Nunn. Like, they can send out Taylor and Kendrick's $15 million and then take back a very minimal salary, depending on who it is. They could send them to OKC if OKC says, hey, just send us a second rounder, we'll absorb both those guys for you. And we'll send you back Kendrick Williams, we'll send you back Mike Muscala, like really minimal salaries. Like, that's where you can kind of be creative with the way that you want to work things for the team. So my only recommendation is, if you want more spending power via cap exceptions, which is the non-taxpayer MLE and the BAE, the biannual exception, it's not easy to do. It is difficult to do. But if you're not going to be keeping Taylor or Kendrick Nunn on this roster, then it's worth considering if you're going to be moving guys out, because you'd essentially be replacing Taylor's $10 million and breaking it down into smaller players for a team like OKC that has too many guys at very small salaries. And then what you could do is sign that $10 million player just to essentially replace, Taylor's $10 million slot. Or it doesn't have to be $10 million, it can be $8 million, whatever it is. And you don't necessarily have to use the BAE, but it's just additional spending power that allows you to, be more competitive in the free agent marketplace. So you could not use the BAE. You could just use the non-taxpayer MLE and split $5 million for two guys that are good. Maybe it's Jeremy Lamb and Dante DiVincenzo. Like, who knows who it could be, but it just allows you more spending power. So that's a little bit more tricky. You have to be perfect with you have to know exactly who you want and have a very good lead on who you're going to be trading and stuff like that. If you really do want to sort of go that direction. I'm of very low confidence that our front office would figure that part out and be able to navigate it that tightly. So because of that, I would assume that they're not going to do it. But I just wanted to present that as an option because um, it is an option if they want to be more competitive. And if they know that they have a deal to open up more cap space, for example, sending Russ to OKC and their $21 million in cap space, taking back Jermichael Green, blah, 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 stuff like that, you could put yourself in position to have more spending power. That kind of stuff matters. I think it's very helpful when you do stuff like that, especially if you don't plan on keeping Russ in the future. And so I don't know what direction they're going to go with this contract. I don't know if they're going to hope that like Kyrie or somebody, blows up his situation with the Nets, kind of like what Harden did with the Rockets when he asked for a trade, and then they came out publicly. If you guys remember, Harden came out, I think the Raphael Stone came out and he said, "Oh, we're willing to get uncomfortable with this situation with Harden if we need to." And then Harden immediately started like just talking about like in post-game conferences, talking about how his team was not competitive. It wasn't a championship team. They weren't a competitive team. He alienated his teammates a little bit to some degree. Guys like John Wall, guys, I think PJ Tucker was on the team at the time. I think Cousins may have been on the team at the time. I may be wrong, but just stuff like that. Like, I don't know how that situation is going to work out with the Nets. The Lakers may just be waiting on that situation or a situation like that, or a situation like Charlotte, a situation like Indiana. Who knows what direction, or even the Knicks, what direction that they may go in. But it's been made pretty clear that they are okay with just waiting it out. And I'm actually okay with that too as well. Russ's expiring is going to continue to get more and more valuable as it gets to the trade deadline. The trade deadline is when it basically has no value until like this season's over for everybody else. And then we go through how we're going through right now where we have like 2-3 days where you can make deals and stuff like that when the season is over. Or not 2-3 days, but you have time to make deals before the season flips over. So I'm okay with that. I'm also of the mind that Ham's offense Russ is going to be better this season, and Ham's offense is going to make things easier for all of the Lakers, not just Russ. I don't think he's going to be like MVP Russ, but I think he's going to be a much better version. And this is obviously optimistic thinking, but I think he'll be a better version or he's going to be closer to the version that we expected out of him. And I think that Ham is going to make a better difference, and a better roster in general is going to make a better difference. So now that we know just kind of the two ways the Lakers could go about doing this, the way that they're doing it now, and then the way that the current outlook that we have here, and then just kind of the other suggestion about getting a hard cap. I'm not going to go through the hard cap method because that's very tricky. That would take me forever. I wanted to just kind of talk about the players that they should target. And prior to the names, all the player options not being offered, all that sort of stuff, I was of the mind that the Lakers should target, able-bodied wings. But one of the things that I wanted to say that I've been trying to advocate for, that I think everybody should be, that is something that would sort of change the dynamic of how I would prioritize what type of player we should target, is basically has to do with this situation with Mo Bamba. Like, because of how much it would cost to get him, if we could get him at the taxpayer MLE, I would prioritize him much higher. Like, he'd be like a tier 1 guy that I would target. Mainly because to get him at that number, to get a floor spacing 5 at that number. Now, if you guys remember, we talked about like Thomas Bryant, DeMarcus Cousins, guys that can make league average at the minimum, league average threes. If the Lakers can land one of those guys at the minimum, I'm okay with that too. If there's a better wing, a Jeremy Lamb or whoever it is that becomes available through the taxpayer MLE, I don't mind that. But they should consider, offering it to a guy like Mo Bamba. He's young. His profile fits exactly, not with, I think a lot of times people look at Anthony Davis and LeBron and stuff like that, and they say, okay, well, this guy fits with them. It's not about just fitting with them, right? And it's not about just making the fit work with Russ. Does he fit into Ham's system? Can Ham take him independently as a talent and put him in other lineups and still be successful. And I think Bamba is a guy that can do that. And that's what we want. Anybody that we bring that we expect to be part of core rotation where we're spending more than a veteran minimum for, we need them to be able to work in multiple combinations. And that's sort of why I keep saying that. Like, I don't think Russ and Talon and Kendrick Nunn and Austin Reeves, and if they want to bring back Malik Monk, like, I don't think all of those guys are going to be able to exist on the roster because there's just too much redundancy with how much they play. The lineups are not as interchangeable with each other. They don't all complement each other. We know that it's even in a different system. Russ and Talon are two players who are most effective attacking the rim. So it's harder for them to play off of each other. Unless one of them becomes, a league average three-point shooter, which could happen. Lakers got Chris Gent, and he's done great stuff for other teams and stuff like that when it comes to just, becoming better shooting teams. So, it's possible. But my thing is just I would rather not risk that, and I would rather have a situation where we have more interchangeable parts. So if that means that we're moving Russ for multiple pieces, that it is what it is. If that means that we're taking Talon and Kendrick Nunn and then we're aggregating up, that's also fine too. We want to get to 8 players, core rotation players, that Darvin Ham can trust throughout the entire season to be able to use in different combinations to be successful. The other 7 guys, they're all interchangeable guys. 3-and-D guys that you can just slip, maybe a 6'9" guy, maybe a 6'6" guy, just depending on what lineup you want to run. Maybe if AD's not playing that night or LeBron's not playing that night, it's a different kind of guy. That's where the Stanley Johnsons, the Wendy Gabriels, those kind of guys kind of help fill the gap or just kind of substitute in and eat minutes for the Lakers and stuff like that so that they can be successful. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. That's the way I would prioritize it. So a guy like Bamba is worth prioritizing to offer your entire non-tax or your entire MLE, taxpayer MLE to. There's some other names that have been floated. Players like Dante DiVincenzo, he's kind of had a drop off. A guy like Jeremy Lamb is potentially a guy. It really depends on who is sort of the priority for him, like who he wants, what he prioritizes most. Does he prioritize the second backcourt mate next? Is the backcourt mate next to Russ the most important thing, or is the floor spacing 5 the most important thing for Ham's scheme to be successful? That's the way I would think of it, and that's why I keep leaning a little bit more towards spending that money towards the floor spacing 5. As it relates to just kind of looking at the players and that have become available and just which ones we could probably tackle and we could probably try and get at a veteran minimum. And I'm pulling up my list right here for you guys as I sort of read through this, so I can kind of mention like all the different players we have. There are a lot of players that are available. Mo Bamba, I've already mentioned. DiVincenzo, he's another guy that we mentioned. Jeremy Lamb, he's also available. TJ Warren is also available. The only thing is I don't know if TJ Warren, how he fits into a starting lineup. I would imagine he would want to be a starter, so that would be a little bit tough to fit in. You have veteran minimum targets like Juan Toscano Anderson. He's a clutch client, so I would almost, if I had to put a percentage, there's probably like a 99.9% chance he's going to end up being a Laker. So if he ends up being a Laker, you guys can circle back and remind me in this video in the comments if I end up being right. Like, the Lakers treat some of their roster spots like the transfer portal for clutch players, especially role players that need to build up their value. And the Lakers, to be honest, are in a position where a guy like Toscano Anderson could, get like 10 to 12 minutes a game at the end of games, or maybe get more minutes on certain nights, just to kind of eat innings. Because one of the things that Mike Budenholzer does, which I know upsets Bucks fans to some degree, is he has a very tight minutes restriction on his star players. Like, I don't think he allows Giannis for most of his games to play more than 32 minutes. Same for Middleton, same for Drew. He tries to keep the workload very consistent and their bodies consistent. He ramps up a little bit more towards the end of the season and in the playoffs. But For the most part, he's not trying to do that. He tried to keep it very tight. And so with that being the case, like, we need bodies. That's 16 minutes. LeBron's not playing 16 minutes. Anthony Davis isn't playing. That Russ won't be playing. Like, those are minutes that we need able bodies to take those opportunities. So, DiVincenzo, Juan Toscano, Jalen Smith, as I've mentioned before, depending on what happens with Indiana, like, is a guy who could potentially be available. Another guy that I was very surprised to hear his name is the Suns let Aaron Holiday go. He's 6'1", so he's not a big wing, but he is like a floor general. If you think of a guy like Tyus Jones for Memphis, probably not to the caliber that Tyus Jones is, at least right now, because Aaron Holiday is very new, but he knows he's a sturdy player, very sturdy body, very good defensive player. He can shoot the three at a very high clip. He's actually pretty strong, just kind of like Drew. Like, Drew's not like a big player, but he's strong. So he can actually check guys that are bigger than him. So he can check a 6'3" or a 6'4" guy because of his strength and stuff like that. It's another guy that's worth targeting. And these are all young players with young legs that they can target. And it's just, these are guys I would target. PJ Dozier over in Orlando is another guy that I would try and target. It's just, there's enough bodies that are available now at this point, and I'm going to try and pull this up so we can see exactly who else is available here. Let's see. We'll see whose options got declined here. Like, essentially, like, what we're looking for here are players who just, they need minutes, and these are players that we have to find. So, like, Josh Okogie over in Minnesota had his qualifying offer. It was declined. Like, they didn't give him a qualifying offer, so now he's an unrestricted free agent. He may be clutch too as well, if I remember correctly. Like, he may be a guy that's available. Like, there are enough guys that are out there that we can target. So the goal is to get to eight guys that Darvin Ham can use in interchangeable situations. So it's going to be Russ, LeBron, AD. We'll figure out what happens with Talon and Nunn. Austin Reeves will probably be part of that. We'll find out what happens with Malik Monk. And then what will happen is, from there, is you're probably looking for wings. You're prioritizing wings and that floor spacing 5. So that's sort of the direction that I would go in. I would try and see if you could land one of those guys very quickly. My expectation is that some of these guys are going to, move very quickly. And I think one of the things that's been very interesting to see, and just one of the things that's been, it's not a surprise, but it's a surprise that it's happening so quickly. Like, a lot of quality players are becoming available, and it's happening really fast. And this is a good time for also the Lakers to leverage what knowledge they may have from Jesse and Joey Buss. If they've scouted out any of these guys, like an Aaron Holiday, like a Jalen Smith, and target those guys if they think that they can be capable players, if they ever got a chance to evaluate them, in the draft a year or two ago. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. A lot of these guys are all cut from the same mold. Oh, there is one more thing. We keep talking about 3-and-D players, and 3-and-D players are, like, we do want to target those guys. But the one thing that I do want to mention is this. When we're talking about 3-and-D players, the 3 part of that player, like the 3-point percentage, it doesn't have to be 40%. If I remember correctly, per Cleaning the Glass, if the Lakers had shot league average, if the Lakers had shot league average from the different areas of the court, so at the rim, mid-range, and then from 3. If they shot below league average in 2 specific areas. Everywhere except the rim, they shot below league average. If they had shot league average from all across the board, they would have been like the 3rd best shooting team in the league. That's how good they were at the rim, despite all the misses that Russ had and stuff like that. So they were really good at the rim and generating spacing to get to the rim, but they were a terrible jump shooting team. So because they were a terrible jump shooting team, we were like way down at the bottom. But if we had been league average as a jump shooting team, so league average from 3 is like what, 35%? if you can find guys that can even hit at 35%, at a 35% clip as the 3-and-D player, and they can consistently hit league average, it makes a massive difference to how the offense functions and the quality of the offense that they get. And so that's important. When we talk about 3-and-D players, we're not talking about, like, we can't exclude somebody just because they don't hit 38% or better. Like, that shouldn't be we just need league average or better 3-point shooters. The higher it is, even better. Or the better call. Like, we shouldn't be like, hey, we want the 40% shooter whose defense is absolutely terrible, but he's a 40% shooter and he's 6'7", as opposed to getting like the 35% shooter who has above average defense and is 6'7". So we want to be smart about how we weigh those sort of things. I would hope our front office is smart about that and prioritizing what it is. And I hope Coach Ham is part of that evaluation process so they can quickly tell which guys do that. But that's the way they should look at it. And then the one other thing is this. Because we are running a 4-out offense, and because chances are in the 4-out offense we'll be generating enough downhill action to kick out threes and swing the ball around and stuff like that, just essentially what the Bucks do, you are going to need those 3-and-D wings, the guys who aren't taking those shots, to be active rebounders in space, which means they're not watching the 3 ball just go up in the air, hit, and then run back. Like, they're crashing the glass to see if they can get offensive rebounds. This is something that the Bucks did very well with Bobby Portis. It's something that they did really well with Pat Connaughton. They did it really well with Dante DiVincenzo when he was on there. Their guards and their wings were active rebounders. And you have to be an active rebounder to be part of this Laker team. It has to happen, because you don't want to leave opportunities out there that you could have possibly capitalized on. And if you're taking threes at a high enough rate, there's going to be long rebounds that are available for players to grab. So we want guys that are active in that capacity. So that's why when you think of a guy like Juan Toscano-Anderson, if he's playing the 4 in certain lineups, or if he's playing the 3 and he's not necessarily the guy who's shooting the 3, he's a good active body to grab rebounds. So you're looking for guys that have good rebounding motors. Another guy that's become available is Troy Brown from Chicago. Chicago was running a 4-out offense or a 5-out offense, depending on who was on the floor. And so there was a lot of rebounds available. Guys like Caruso, guys like Lonzo, guys like Vucevic, like, they had to grab those open rebounds, because if they don't, those are offensive rebounds that go to the other team. And, you don't want to give extra opportunities to the other team. So a guy like Troy Brown has a high defensive profile, or not defensive profile, high rebounding profile, because he was tasked with that responsibility. I don't know where he's at defensively. He probably shoots about league average from 3, but those are the kinds of guys that you want. And ideally, you want to try and target guys who have those 3 qualities. League average from 3, at least average defensively or better. And then obviously if they're above average in any of these things, you could toggle it around. But they have to have good rebounding motors. As Kobe has said, Mike Krzyzewski has said, I feel like every great coach has ever said that. Phil Jackson probably said this, like, defense and rebounding are the 2 core things that you need to win a championship. And the Lakers need more of those guys, because we can't expect Anthony Davis to grab every single rebound, or LeBron grab every single rebound, or Russ to have to do it. It's not reasonable to do that and expect them to carry the offensive workload that they have to carry. We need guys that are willing to do that. So as the Lakers kind of embark into free agency, if you guys do catch this beforehand, that's what I expect. I would expect the Lakers to try and target guys like that. That would be my recommendation. If you target a 3-and-D guy, it's okay if he's not a 40% 3-point shooter. Aim for a guy that hits at least league average, but we need a good rebounding motor, and we need somebody who's willing to, can not stay in front of this guy, but is willing to scrap and fight with the guy that he has to guard on the perimeter, or in the mid-range, or whatever it is. Those are the kinds of guys we should target from as 3-and-D guys. But we really, really, really want to prioritize a floor spacing 5. It will allow the Lakers to space the floor the way that Ham wants, but it will also take the pressure off of Anthony Davis to have to be a prolific jump shooter. If we have a guy who can knock down, a 38% clip 3-ball. So if that ends up being Thomas Bryant, if that ends up being Mo Bamba, if that ends up being Jalen Smith, if that ends up being somebody else, DeMarcus Cousins, who knows? If it ends up being any of those guys, those are the guys, like, we really need to prioritize signing those guys, And I don't know what the dollar value will be, but I would hope that the Lakers are smart about how they prioritize the dollar value for all these different players and stuff like that. I hope they spend wisely. The last thing I will say is I know there's been rumors about possibly giving the taxpayer MLE to Malik Monk. I don't know if that would be wise, just because it he would add to a logjam. So if you're going to trade Talon or trade Russ or trade Nunn and get a bunch of wings, then you can do that. That's fine. But you can't do that and then just keep the roster as it is and hope to fill out a bunch of 3-and-D wings. I don't think that's a good way of using that cap mechanism, and I don't think it's a good way of building the roster. Again, because it's just too much redundancy with these lineups and stuff like that, and the lineup combinations. And he's has some issues with defense too as well. He's also a smaller shooting guard. He's not a big shooting guard, so that's another thing. So that's what I've got for this episode. I expect Lakers Twitter to panic as soon as people start signing players and they're not attached to the Lakers. I hope Rob and the rest of these guys don't wait around. I hope they're vigilant and very quick about it. But we'll see what happens. It's it'll be nothing necessarily gets resolved on as soon as free agency starts. I would imagine there's still a lot of trades available, a lot of unexpected things that are going to go down after guys like Miles Bridges or guys like DeAndre Ayton, once they figure out where they're going for restricted free agency. And certain guys like Bradley Beal, James Harden, they get their extensions. And like Brunson signs, he's been attached in New York. Once those signings all start landing, I think we're going to start seeing players getting moved around. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. So I appreciate you guys joining in and listening to just kind of the players that we have available that we should possibly target. And, as always, if you can subscribe, if you can like, it actually helps. It gets my videos to rank as recommended videos. Even if you've already subscribed, if you can just make sure to like, it always helps out. And as always, I appreciate everybody that follows on the timeline or follows these videos. I hope it's informative and you guys enjoy it. And if nothing else, I'll see you guys.